Hi, welcome back to Recap Cinema. Today I will talk about the show called Silo. Sheriff Holston Becker moves through the silo on his daily routine and arrives at his office in the sheriff's department. He writes a letter, takes off his badge, and then asks Deputy Sam Marnes to meet him in Holding 3. When Marnes arrives, Holston has locked himself inside and thrown the key into the corridor. Holston tells Marnes he wants to see his wife, and while Marnes pleads for him not to say the words, Holston tells him that he wants to go out. 2 years earlier, Holston and his wife Allison find out they have been granted childbearing status for the next year, although this will be their third and final chance to conceive. At breakfast, they are approached by Gloria Hildebrand, a fertility counselor who Holston thinks commits fraud by promising people babies if they do what she says. Gloria doesn't say anything illegal but asks Allison to see her if she has an open mind. Allison has her birth control chip removed by Dr. Leonard, and they immediately start trying for a baby. With 342 days left, Allison talks with Karen in the IT department about trying for a baby. They are interrupted by Bernard Holland, who tells Allison that he removed a post that she put up about how to recover deleted files. Although Allison just wanted to cut down on service calls, Bernard tells her there are processes for a reason. Allison admits to Holston later that she knew she was breaking the rules but thinks there are too many rules and wonders why even asking questions about before the rebellion is forbidden. With only 157 days remaining, Allison is still not pregnant. The silo prepares for the celebration of Freedom Day, and Mayor Ruth Johns is worried about violence or disruption. Holston and Marnes assure her that things will go smoothly. Johns comments that the view from the sensor showing the outside world is getting harder to see because there has not been a cleaning in a long time. Holston thinks this is good and means things in the silo are going well, but Johns knows that people need to see what is out there to remind them. Allison meets with Gloria again, who asks to see her in private. Gloria is worried about people listening in and starts the water running. She begins telling Allison that others like her wonder about what was on the destroyed servers and burned books from before the rebellion, and even if the rebels were responsible. Then Gloria asks Allison if she thinks she's the type of person that won't have children. Allison has no idea what Gloria is talking about and who they are. As Freedom Day approaches, Karen gives Allison a request from George Wilkins, a programmer in the midsection of the silo. He wants someone there in the morning. Allison has to travel to the mids and stay overnight in a hostel. Since Holston will be working the Freedom Day celebrations, Allison doesn't mind working. As Freedom Day is remembered, Allison meets with George, who shows her an old hard drive he has acquired. George is pleased he managed to get Allison after several tries, since he wanted to talk to her specifically. George printed out her post on recovering deleted files and found that the hard drive has files on it, but he can't access them. The hard drive's serial number isn't recorded by ID and could be over 140 years old, predating the rebellion and in danger of being a relic. As the celebrations continue, Allison manages to access the drive and finds it full of files including blueprints of the silo. Realizing it is a relic, Allison tells George to bury it and leaves. But George begins looking through the files. Both of Allison's recent experiences rattle her, and she starts looking for answers. She goes to see Gloria again and asks her why they don't want people to have children. Allison also goes to see George again, and they look through the files on the hard drive together. One file seems to show a green and lush outside world. Allison is at the end of her year to be pregnant, and her appointment to have her birth control reinstalled is scheduled. She doesn't make it, and when Holston finds her at home, she begins to tell him about what she found and shows him the actual birth control chip that she just dug out of herself. The entire process was a sham, and she was never going to be able to conceive. Allison is bleeding, and Holston goes for the doctor, but when he returns, Marnes tells him Allison is in the level 1 cafeteria. Allison is telling everyone there the view of the outside is a lie, and it is green and lush with life. In front of everyone, she says she wants to go outside. Holston is shocked, and Allison is arrested. Mayor Johns tries to find a way out of the situation, but as Holston points out, the rules of the silo boil down to one thing: never ask to go out. Both Gloria and George are pulled in for questioning as they had associated with Allison recently, but George maintains that Allison never went back to see him, and Judicial does not find the hard drive. Because it will be the first cleaning in a while, the mayor begins preparations for the public event. Allison and Holston talk, and while she says she loves him, she cannot deny the truth she has seen. Promises that if she goes out and it's a barren, toxic wasteland like they have been shown, she will not clean the sensor. If it is green like she believes, then she will clean it. As Allison is suited up and sentenced to exile, she leaves the silo. Holston and the rest watch as she cleans the sensor, and then begins to walk away before collapsing and dying on the hill. 2 years later, Holston learns that George Wilkins is dead after going over a rail on level 120. Holston wants to know if it's suicide or an accident, and is told by Marnes that an engineer believes it was murder. The two make the trek down to the lower levels and meet with Deputy Hank. Then they are taken to see Juliet Nichols, an engineer who works to keep the generator running and the silo alive. Back in the present, Marnes asks Holston why he is doing this. Holston says he is finally listening to Allison. He is going to find her and know the truth. Soon, Holston Becker is suited up to leave the silo as Mayor Ruth Johns goes through the traditional ceremony of sending someone out for a cleaning. Holston apologizes for causing a fuss as he goes through the airlock and into the outside world. As he emerges, Holston begins to see the outside world. Throughout the silo, people gather to watch the cleaning in their various cafeterias throughout the facility, including Juliet. The population cannot believe that a sheriff is being sent out to clean. As Holston stands outside, he sees the world as green and lush with birds flying in the sky. Realizing that the rest of the silo has to see it, Holston cleans the sensor. As the population watches, Holston starts going towards his wife's body and then begins to succumb to the toxic environment. Holston removes his helmet, crawls to Allison's body, and dies. In the cafeteria, Juliet storms out, calling the sheriff a liar. Tempers begin flaring at a sheriff being sent out, and fights break out. Deputy Hank and Knox stop the commotion, and Knox rallies them, saying these problems are for up top and the mids, not for those in the deep down whose only job it is to keep the lights on. At the sheriff's department, Marnes finds Holston's letter left before his exile. Sandy tells him about reports of people lining up at recycling stations all over the silo, requesting hammers and pipes, anything that could be used in defense. Marnes goes to see Johns, asking who the next sheriff will be. Initially, Johns believes that it would be Marnes, but he refuses, saying he plans to retire after helping to break the new sheriff in. If Holston had retired, he would have picked his own successor. Johns has been combing through the records of the silo, looking for any previous mention of a mayor sending out a sheriff to clean. Marnes realizes that Johns is worried that the cause of the previous rebellion could have been the actions of a mayor sending a sheriff out to clean. At a recycling station, arguments over a sledgehammer threaten to turn violent. Deputy Brooks tries to maintain order, but it is calmed down by the arrival of Robert Sims of Judicial. Juliet goes to relieve stress by fixing things in Martha Walker's electronics workshop. Although reluctant, Martha convinces Juliet to talk about what is bothering her. Juliet begins to talk about George Wilkins and how she believes his death was murder. The day before George's death, Juliet and the rest of her team were in a cafeteria celebrating Cooper becoming Juliet's shadow. Juliet and George were in a relationship, but it was not sanctioned, so he kept his distance at events so that Judicial does not become suspicious. George wanted to tell Juliet something and planned to tell her later at her place, but once Juliet got off shift, George was nowhere to be found. He left a package in her quarters with a note and a relic. At breakfast the next morning, Juliet learns that George is dead after going over the rail around level 120. In private, Juliet is distraught and breaks down. Believing it not to be suicide, Juliet tries to convince Deputy Hank of the fact. Hank wants it not to be suicide, as that is a crime against the silo and would save him a ton of paperwork. Hank runs it up to the sheriff as the concerns of a co-worker, prompting Holston and Marnes to travel to the deep down to investigate. Hank shows them the vent shaft where George was found, estimating he had fallen 100 feet. Juliet points out George did not fit the obvious signs of depression, and no one else was on the stairs at 3 in the morning. While Marnes checks on Porter's activity on the stairs, Holston and Juliet view George's body looking for any unusual markings or signs of harm. Holston and Juliet talk, and he reveals he knows she and George were in a relationship. He wants to help, but Juliet needs to tell him the truth. She reveals the relic and half of the message that George left her, on the condition that she would not be ratted out to Judicial. The message says, "Remember where you last saw this." Juliet takes Holston to the deepest depths of the silo and into tunnels that are more illegal than any relic. Hidden away is a machine that Juliet believes is the last remnant of the technology that the founders used to build the silo. Down here, George has created a camp where he investigates the silo and finds relics. Investigating the camp, Holston and Juliet find the hard drive and instructions on deleting files covered in Allison's handwriting. Holston asks Juliet to trust him and he will send a signal while he investigates. Juliet tells Martha that she never heard from Holston again, and now he's gone. But she admits she didn't show him the other half of the note that says, "I found what I was looking for." Johns and Marnes talk over the judge's suggestions for sheriff, the main one being a former deputy, Paul Billings. Marnes admits that Holston did lead a candidate for his successor. He suggested Juliet as the sheriff. Johns resolves to at least meet her and plans to travel down all 144 levels to meet her. At George's camp, Juliet finds a large amount of rope and descends deep into the cave, looking for a door at the end of an old tunnel that George told her he found. Juliet descends down the rope, losing her light into the water below. Thank you for watching. If Feel free to leave a like and comment below. Subscribe to the channel for the next part.